be presenting both the George Scanlon Award and the Nadia Niazi Mustafa Endowed Award in Islamic Art and Architecture. This annual ceremony bookends our academic events calendar and is a highlight of our graduate research output. And it's an opportunity for us to honor and celebrate some of our recent graduates and their work, and to remember our late friend, mentor, and colleague, Professor George Scanlon. I was among the lucky ones who studied with Professor Scanlon, and we all still remember our exciting field trips with him. We learned a lot from his wide erudition, his knowledge, all the references he made. And I was also lucky to have had Professor Scanlon as a mentor when I first joined AUC as a faculty member. And as I've mentioned here before, Professor Scanlon continued to come to campus almost every day after he retired, even on Saturdays. And he would come very early on the first bus, but I was there before him oftentimes. And he would walk down the hall, usually humming or singing some song, and then he would walk into my office and we would have a chat. And usually it did not begin with good morning or any pleasantries or anything like that. He just started mid-conversation on whatever it is he was thinking about on that day. And I hope I'm not making this up, but I think that one day he walked in and he had read an article by Yasmin al-Rashidi published in the New York Review of Books. I think that was the occasion. But he went on about how special our women students were. And he commented about the various female students he'd had over the years, how special, how different, how careful and meticulous in their research they were. They were something else, and it's the women of this country who will take this country forward, he would say. And I apologize to my male colleagues and our male alumni. Many of you, of course, have gone on to do wonderful things in the world. But we kept wondering, I think, that day on what it was about the upbringing in different Egyptian families that led the women of the same family to somehow produce work that was oftentimes quite different from that of their brothers. And I reflected on this as I was preparing for tonight's evening and the ceremony, and on many of the outstanding scholars who studied with and worked with Professor Scanlon and who've been affiliated with our department at different periods of time. Women like Layla Ali Ibrahim, Crystal Kessler, Doris Abu Saif, Shahinda Karim, Leonor Fernandez, Nelly Hanna, and many others. So it seemed fitting that today we get to celebrate 3 outstanding women affiliated with the department. I want to start firstly by Mrs. Nadia Niazi Mustafa, our esteemed supporter. Having studied anthropology herself and then having built a successful career in agribusiness, Mrs. Mustafa then audited some courses in the department with Professor Scanlon and Professor Bernard O'Kane. And undoubtedly, somehow, she was able to connect between an interest in the natural and environmental history of Egypt on the one hand, and its cultural, material, and intangible history on the other. And that perhaps was one of the impetuses that encouraged her to set up both the Nadia Niazi Fellowship, which has been supporting many of our graduate students in their studies, as well as the Nadia Niazi Mustafa Endowed Award in Islamic Art and Architecture, which we're celebrating this evening. Professor Scanlon and his students continue to connect people across generations and countries. George Scanlon lived a rich life. He was born in Pennsylvania in 1925, and after serving in the Second World War, he graduated from Villanova with a degree in chemistry in 1945, and then earned a second degree in literature and history from Swarthmore College in 1950. And after another stint of military service, he went to Princeton for an MA in Oriental Studies, and finally got his doctorate from there in 1959. He first came to Egypt in 1957, following fieldwork for his doctoral dissertation. For his PhD, he worked on the 15th century Arabic manuscript on the art of Mamluk warfare, تفريج الكروب في تدبير الحروب by Omar ibn Ibrahim al-Awsi al-Ansari. And in Egypt, Scanlon worked with the famous KAC Creswell and joined the American Research Center in Egypt, which he would direct from 1959 to 1961, and then again from 65 to 66. And there is another connection with ARCE today as well. In the 1960s, Scanlon did fieldwork at the monastery of Qasr al-Wiz in Nubia, and later from the mid-60s to the 80s, he co-directed the ARCE-sponsored Fustat expedition, which might be the work he's most remembered for. Professor Scanlon joined AUC as a faculty member in 1974, succeeding Cresswell, and he went on for another 37 years, teaching and mentoring, developing our Arabic Studies program, and defending AUC's liberal arts mission through his various services to the institution. On Professor Scanlon's death in 2014, some of his former students and faculty members in the department initiated a proposal to set up a graduate student award and keynote lecture in his name. It is as a teacher and educator that he is most fondly remembered, and so it seemed fitting that the best way to honor him was to allow and encourage future generations of students to proceed in the path of Arabic and Islamic studies and Islamic art history. And it's thanks to the diligent and relentless work of Iman Abdel Fattah and Noha Abu Khatwa in particular that this award was established. The department has been able to start offering the award in 2017 or since 2017. And as you can see, since then, we've had a number of winning theses. And many of the awardees have gone on to do exciting things and to continue on. Some of them have continued with their research. Muhammad Shaban, our first awardee, has already earned his PhD from Queen Mary in London. Mariam Al-Ashmawi is almost done with her PhD at the Free University in Berlin. Norhanu Naidel was doing a second master's in architecture. Ian Greer began his PhD at the University of Toronto, and Mona Hafiz, who won the award last year, presented some of her research at the Mesa conference this year. So we're very proud of them, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of those of you here in the room who've contributed to the award. And you'll find in the brochure you have for this evening a list of all the donors. It's your generosity really that makes this possible. And this is how you can top up your donation. Every year, the department forms a committee of 3 faculty members, usually from the different specializations that we cover, to review the master's thesis successfully defended over the previous 2 years. And this year, in 2026, the committee included Professor Bernard O'Kane, Professor of Islamic Art and Architecture, Professor Tamer Al-Laythi, Assistant Professor of Middle East History, and Professor Adam Talib, Associate Professor of Arabic Literature, and our current Director of Graduate Studies. They reviewed 6 shortlisted theses, out of which the winner is chosen. I'm happy to announce that the committee recommended Zain Al-Azzouni for the Scanlon Award for her thesis, Decorated Wooden Ceilings of the Burji Mamluk Period in Cairo, supervised by Professor Bernard O'Kane. In the words of the committee members, Al-Azzouni has produced an encyclopedic and rich study of decorated wooden ceilings in Cairo, which will be an essential reference work for historians of Islamic architecture. So going forward, we're going to say, in Azzouni 2026, you find this or that. The second award we are celebrating today is the Nadia Niazi Award in Islamic Art and Architecture. This was established in 1999 by Mrs. Nadia Niazi Mustafa. And as you can see, already a number of theses have won the award over the past few years. Of these, Salma Azzam, Menna Al-Mahi, and Amina Karam are, the 3 of them are currently in PhD programs, and they are finishing their theses. Mayi Kolkaila has been teaching as an adjunct professor with us, and she has recently published part of her MA dissertation work at, or in the journal Annales Islamologiques in the 2023 volume. The committee, the Graduate Awards Committee, was joined by Professor Noha Abu Khatwa this year in deliberating the Nadia Niazi Mustafa Award, and I'm happy to announce that they recommended, Yumna Musa for her thesis, Ottoman Wikalas in Cairo, Islamic Art and Architecture Beyond the Mosque, which was supervised by Drs. Ellen Kenny and Noha Abu Khatwa. As the committee explained, Musa has produced a thorough and careful database of Ottoman Wikalas in Cairo, while also showing for the first time that Wikalas were used for education as well. Our Dean, Professor John Malloy, is going to be presenting the awards. So I invite him to come to the stage to present firstly the George Scanlon Graduate Student Award in Arab and Islamic Civilizations to Zain Al-Azzouni. And Zain will be presenting us or offering a short presentation on her research. And then we will move to the second awardee, and then finally to the Scanlon keynote lecture. We're very proud that this year's keynote speaker is Dr. Nicholas Warner, and I'll be introducing him after the student presentations. So please join me in congratulating Zain Al-Azzouni for her winning the George Scanlon Student Award.
Is Zain here? Congratulations to Zain, and with appreciation to Professor O'Kane for his supervision of the work. Thank you very much. I think you have some things to tell us now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amina, and thank you everyone for coming today. I never got the chance to meet Dr. Scanlon myself, but from everything I've heard about him from my grandmother, Nadia Niazi, and from other members of the faculty, I would have very much liked to meet him. I'd also like to thank the Scanlon Award Committee and the ARC Department for recognizing my work, Drs. Amin Al-Bindari and Noha Bukhatwa for taking part in my defense, Dr. Dina Bahoum, Iman Morgan at AUC's Rare Books Library, and Hind Mustafa, who encouraged me to pursue this degree to begin with. I'd especially like to thank Dr. Bernard O'Kane, my advisor, for his invaluable input and patience. And last but definitely not least, my grandmother, Nadia Niazi, who has another endowed award here today for constantly serving as a source of inspiration and for lending me most of her library on Islamic art and architecture to finish this project, which I will return one day. One day, soon. Yes, I can start anyway until this is fixed. When I first started this monumental project, I had no idea just how many in-situ ceilings I would find. The current number stands somewhere around 200, probably a bit more, from over 50 sites in historic Cairo. The research and survey portion of this project was quite expansive. Along with my own on-site visits, numerous public and private photographic databases were consulted, including the Nadim Foundation's invaluable database of site surveys in Cairo from 2016 onwards. Available waqfiyas and studies on the Cairo Geneza were also consulted whenever possible, along with a thorough review of the records of the committee, which provided invaluable information regarding the pre-restoration state of many ceilings. Intervention reports were also studied, along with a wide range of secondary sources published in Arabic, English, French, and German. This was all compiled into my own database of ceilings, organized by monument type, and which includes information on the site name, patron, foundation date, and dates and content of known interventions, reference images for the ceilings in question, a provisional classification of typology, and summarized descriptions of structure, ornamentation, and epigraphy. Previous studies on ceilings by Alexandre Lezine, Yasmin Wardeni, and Annie-Christine Daskalakis-Matthews were also considered, and proved particularly useful when developing the provisional typology, which forms the bulk of my work, and which I will attempt to briefly outline here today. It's worth noting that many chapters of my thesis, including those which go into further detail regarding the concurrent development of cornices and spandrels, linked intrinsically to the ceilings which surmount them, as well as materials and techniques, the actual ornamentation of ceilings, including their epigraphy and heraldry, and a supplementary chapter on the development of courtyard lantern ceilings will not be discussed here due to time constraints, but you can read my thesis next year. So jumping right into the typology, which I will attempt to go through. Ceilings of type 1, here defined as those with exposed beams and coffers, were by far the most popular and long-lived type, appearing consistently across both the Bahri and Burji Mamluk periods. Type 1A, referenced here by a photograph of the ceiling in the northeast entrance vestibule in the mosque of Sultan Qaid Bey at Alat al-Kabsh, were composed of large load-bearing beams and cross beams, alternatively called joists, which span the width of the ceiling, creating long recessed sections in between. Beams were frequently squared in their early Mamluk forms, becoming more rounded, chamfered, and generally more ornate during the Burji period, as seen in this late example. Ceilings of type 1B, here represented by an image of the entrance vestibule ceiling in the mosque of Qani Bey al-Rammah near the citadel, dated to 1503, were further subdivided into square and rectangular coffers using smaller joists placed perpendicular to the crossbeams, sometimes even further divided into smaller compartments. Type 1C, and here we have a lovely image of the ceiling on the underside of the Dikka in the western Iwan of the Mosque of Amir Khairbek, which was added in 1536, can also be considered coffered, although here they are distinguished by a significant decrease in depth between the beams and the coffers, resulting in a distinctive grid-like appearance. Ceilings of this type are frequently referred to in Mamluk primary sources as Sakandarani, Alexandrian, or Shami, Syrian or Damascene. These geographic references need not designate an origin per se. Beamed and coffered ceilings were widespread throughout the arts of ancient Greco-Roman, Byzantine, and early Arabo-Coptic Egypt, to say nothing of their proliferation in surrounding regions in Syria, Ethiopia, Yemen, Iraq, and the like. But rather an active tradition which may have been popularized in Cairo by itinerant Alexandrian or Syrian craftsmen, looked to by Cairene craftsmen as a source of inspiration, or more generally formed part of a thriving network of artistic exchange common throughout the central Islamic lands at the time. The term Saqf Mansuri, which also appears in primary source documents but has yet to be explored fully, also presents some intriguing possibilities regarding potential influence from the Western Islamic sphere, in this case from Sabra Mansura in Tunis, capital of the Fatimid Caliphate during the mid to late 10th century. So if I can jump back a bit in time, the sadly no longer surviving stone ceiling in the entrance vestibule of the Mashhad al-Hussein in Aleppo, which is dated to 1195-96. It's easy to see, looking at this ceiling, early precedents for the kinds of beamed and coffered examples we later find appearing in wood in the Mamluk period, such as the early surviving example in the Iwan of Deir al-Banat, which is pictured on the bottom there. The Mashhad al-Hussein ceiling was photographed by Ernst Hertzfeld in the mid-20th century and is described by him as an imitation in stone of a wooden ceiling. And this idea that wooden ceilings may have predated stone ones, but that the earliest surviving examples are in stone due to the durability of the material, is one that permeates throughout this work and offers an interesting starting point for reflecting on the kinds of ceilings that may have once existed in Cairo or in the central Islamic lands as a whole, but which we no longer have physical evidence of today. Type 2 ceilings have a similar underlying framework to those of type 1, although here the beams are entirely hidden by planking to create a flat surface better suited to larger continuous designs. Trimmers, another type of joist, are sometimes used to divide and demarcate the various ceiling areas. Ceilings of this type can be divided into two main categories: 2A, composed of flat overall designs, and 2B, distinguished by the presence of a recessed central square or rectangular field surrounded by wide border bands. The subcategories of 2AII and 2BII at the end are essentially identical to their respective counterparts, but are distinguished by the presence of a large central recessed polygon, often surrounded by smaller, similarly recessed polygons. Apart from the completely flat ceilings of type 2AI, other examples in this category can be linked to those ceilings described in primary sources as Saqf Lawh wa Fisqiyya and Saqf Hud wa Fisqiyya. In Mamluk primary source documents, the term Hud and Fisqiyya evidently linked to the floor fountains or basins common in Mamluk architecture. Within the ceilings of type 2, there is a provisional category, type 2C, which may be identified, in which flat surfaces are ornamented with geometric strapwork designs using small wooden frames attached to a backing of wooden planks, as in the ceilings in the entrance vestibule of the Mosque of Ahmad al-Mihmandar on the left, and that in the eastern niche of the northern Iwan in the Qa of Muhibb al-Din al-Awaqa in the center. In some cases, these designs are executed in interlocking joinery, as in the right-hand side example from a soffit on the exterior facade of the Khanqa of Daifa Khatoon in Aleppo, dated to 1327-28. Ceilings with octagonal coffers, type 3 in the present typology, are divided into two main categories. 3A, with flat octagonal coffers, as represented here in the left and center images by two ceilings from the Qa of Muhabb ad-Din al-Muwaqqa, and they're dated to the late 15th, early 16th centuries. And 3B, where the octagonal coffers are formed out of small hemispherical domes inserted into an octagonal frame, as in the image on the right-hand side from the annex room in the palace of Amir Bashtek, dated to 1334 to 39. These lovely sketches by the well-known 19th century architect and draftsman, Jules Bourgois, help provide an idea regarding the basic construction and ornamentation of type 3B ceilings, not always visible to the naked eye. Ceilings of this type are composed of the very same underlying framework as those of types 1 and 2, with planking and decorative structural elements used to hide the underlying orthogonal base below. These were frequently referred to in Mamluk primary sources as Saqf Qubab or Saqf Qasa'at, though the exact difference between them still needs to be considered in more detail. While the sequence of surviving octagonal coffered ceilings from the Bahri period has already been discussed in some detail by earlier scholarship, the continuation and development of the ceiling type into the Burji period has yet to be fully explored. Surviving in situ evidence, as well as evidence from waqfiyas for non-extant sites, both indicate that flat and true octagonal coffered ceilings continued to be produced during the later Mamluk period, though perhaps in slightly differing configurations. We now move to, in my opinion, one of the most interesting ceiling typologies considered, those with muqarnas vaults or hanging muqarnas. The latter a more literal representation of actual stalactites than perhaps any other muqarnas type. 4B, the more complex iteration, can be further subdivided into two. 4BI is represented here in the left-hand side by an image of the Western Iwan ceiling from the palace of Amir Bashtek. While in all other respects, the ceiling appears almost identical to the previously discussed octagonal coffered type, it is distinguished by one crucial element, hanging muqarnas, highlighted here by a small orange circle in the detail below. You'll have a clearer image in a second. This ceiling is the first extant example of its kind to display hanging muqarnas instead of keystones or bosses. Although even earlier examples in an almost identical configuration can be found in Yemen, in the nave ceiling of the eastern mihrab in the mosque of Zafar Dubbin, dated to 1204, 1217, and depicted in the right-hand side image. This and other Yemeni examples, as James Allen points out in his insightful study of early Islamic decorated ceilings published in 1994, may not necessarily have even been Yemeni inventions, but rather part of a much wider and older tradition of wooden ceilings in Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, for which no early surviving examples remain. This photograph by K.C. Creswell of the deconstructed Sabil ceiling of Farag ibn Bar'u provides a good example of what these hanging muqarnas looked like at eye level. They're surprisingly large up close. These ornamental hanging elements were described in primary sources as dawali, a term which is believed to derive, at least in part, from association with a variety of black grape bunches known to produce dense, picturesque grapes. Ceilings of type 4 BII, alternatively, we're nearing the end, are arranged in radial grids, often in concentric or overlapping circular frameworks. They are described by Max Hertz-Besha as certainly among the most interesting examples of Arab woodwork, and have survived in a wonderful range of ceilings, starting with the left-hand side example in the southern Iwan in the palace of Amir Bashtek, and continuing throughout the Burji period, even if in limited numbers. While hanging muqarnas have often been described in the context of the Islamic West, Michael Meinecke's Mamluk Architecture, Volume 1, presents a particularly cohesive narrative for the development and evolution of muqarnas ceilings and hanging muqarnas in Cairo and Bilad al-Sham, vis-a-vis the interrelationship of their building schools. This slide depicts a very abbreviated visual summary of the development of these ceiling types in stone, a medium which, as mentioned earlier, often survived where contemporary or earlier wooden examples may have not. So moving from the top row on left, you can see the development from single vaulted and double vaulted muqarnas domes, culminating in those with dripping muqarnas. The second row of images, alternatively, highlights 3 out of 6 examples in a series of flat muqarnas canopy ceilings in orthogonal or radial grids, complete with dripping muqarnas, and all built for prominent figures in the Mamluk administration during the 3rd reign of Sultan al-Nasr Muhammad ibn Qalawun. On display here are examples from the Mosque of Ulmais al-Hagab in Cairo, on the far left, which is the first in this series, followed by those in the ground floor Mosque of Amir Bashtek, and then that in the Madrasa of Ismail al-Salami in Jerusalem. all constructed between 1329 and 39. While previous scholarship has rightly pointed out that the fashion for this latter series of masonry ceilings was relatively short-lived, being limited to the 4th decade of the 14th century and not taken up thereafter, the appearance of a group of wooden stalactite ceilings from the late 14th to early 16th centuries, some in nearly identical configurations to the earlier stone examples, present some intriguing possibilities regarding the adaptation and development of this form in wood. These ceilings are represented here by a lovely set of examples from the Sabil of Farag ibn Bal'u, the Mimbar of Al-Mu'ayyid Sheikh, the entrance vestibule of the Madrasa of Janibi al-Ashrafi, the Qibla Iwan in the Madrasa of Al-Jawhariyya in Al-Azhar, which I wasn't able to access, unfortunately, despite my best efforts, and the underside of the Dikka in the Mosque of Abu Bakr ibn Muzhir, all dated between 1400 and 1480. The last ceiling type to consider is what I have termed ceilings with hybrid designs due to their corresponding use of a particular set of features found in other earlier ceiling types. Only 3 examples of these ceilings have been located so far, all dated to the late Burji period and found within sabils associated with the emirs Qajmas al-Ishaqi, Azbak al-Yusufi, and Sultan al-Ghuri. It is entirely possible that other examples may be found in sites not yet surveyed, or perhaps only in sabils, if their use was limited to this latter building type. These hybrid ceilings are exemplars of their kind and display considerable originality in their reuse and reworking of various components of earlier ceiling types in a novel form. In a single composition, these ceilings make use of large beams with recessed rectangular sections in between, recalling the ceilings of type 1, the use of flat octagonal coffers of type 3, large recessed central medallions or foils found in the ceilings of type 2, hanging configurations of muqarnas found in type 4, and outer edges ornamented with shell-like niches and undulating borders, also similar to the ceilings of type 1. The close geographical and chronological proximity of all known examples of this type may eventually, with further research, be found to indicate a direct workshop connection of some sort. And very much in closing, I would just like to take this moment to highlight the lovely range and variety of pseudo-ceilings that are found on mimbars, a few examples of which are depicted here, all invested with the same care and artistry found in ceilings proper, albeit on a miniature scale. And these connections become even more interesting when considering the close chronological or even geographical proximity of some of these ceilings and mimbar ceilings. So on the top, you have a ceiling from the Sabil of Farag ibn Bar'u. On the bottom, from the Mosque of Al-Mu'ayyid Sheikh, very close in date. And on the right-hand side, you have the Sabil ceiling and the Mimbar ceiling from the Mosque of Azbak al-Yusufi. So these present intriguing possibilities regarding workshop connections. And that is all. Thanks, guys. There was more, just so you know, there were materials, there was mother of pearl, it's gone now. Too late for next time.
If anybody has questions, maybe we can take a couple of questions to Zain before we move to our next awardee, if there are questions. They will ask you in the break. They will keep thinking of difficult questions.
Yes, I couldn't access.
Here, can you?
The Madrasa al-Gawhariyya, this is my father, by the way, the Madrasa of al-Gawhariyya in Al-Azhar.
Why? Political issues?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, political reasons. I don't need to say it right now.
Any other less embarrassing questions? Okay, well, I congratulate you again, Zain, and thank you for excellent work, and I hope you publish some of it at least. Okay, so I will ask Dean John Malloy once more to the stage to award the Nadia Niazi Award in Islamic Art and Architecture to Yomna Musa for her thesis, Ottoman Wikalas in Cairo, Islamic Architecture Beyond the Mosque.
Congratulations, Yumna. And with appreciation also to your supervisors, Professor Kenny and Professor Abu Khatwa. So without further ado, a few words about your work.
Thank you very much, Dean Malloy and Dr. Amina, and to all my professors at the Department of Arab and Islamic Civilizations at AUC, without whom I could not be here today. I would also like to thank Mrs. Nadia Nezi for her support to students of the Arabic department. Really, without your support, I couldn't have finished my MA degree, so I'm really, truly grateful. I'd also, of course, like to thank my supervisors, Dr. Ellen Kenny and Dr. Noha Bukhatwa, who have been incredibly supportive throughout my thesis journey and provided me with so much of their time and expertise beyond official classes and office hours. Start from the beginning. Yes. So the idea for my thesis research came to me because of a question I had about two seemingly contradictory directions in the study of Ottoman Cairo. The first direction holds that between the 16th and 18th centuries, Cairo experienced a decrease in the amount of architectural construction, mainly due to the limitations of the walis, who only held their positions for an average of 2 years. In her work, Egypt's Adjustment to Ottoman Rule, Doris Berens-Abouseif argues that, unlike the Mamluk sultans, the Ottoman pashas hardly ever constructed at the center of the city, and that they were not interested in prestigious architectural projects. Evidence for this can be seen in the more recent work by Dr. Shahinda Karim in her book Ottoman Cairo, where we see that the number and sizes of the mosques surveyed were rather modest or quite modest compared to the mosques of earlier periods. The second view, on the other hand, argues that during the Ottoman period, Egypt experienced a boom in commercial activity coinciding with global transformations in the Red Sea trade and Egypt's monopoly on commodities like coffee. In her work, Dr. Nelly Hanna shows that this actually led to circulation of an unprecedented amount of money and the creation of new opportunities for amassing wealth. Similarly, historian Hussein Mohammed Abdul Mati, in his book L'Aila wa Tharwa, shows that many humble merchants were able to amass a wealth equivalent to billions, millions of paras by working in Ottoman Cairo and forging strong monetary networks with walis, janissaries, and even the ulama. I couldn't help but wonder how this incredible amount of massive wealth did not translate into architecture. I thought perhaps there are other patterns of urban patronage that were previously overlooked and that are more in line with Ottoman Cairo's economic status. I thought that it was the most logical option was to turn my gaze away or beyond the mosque towards a building that is more concentrated on commercial activity or more centered on commercial activity. The Wakala was the perfect choice because it essentially is a type of urban caravanserai that has storerooms or shops in its ground floor and an apartment complex in its upper floors. Building on previous surveys of their number, I decided to do my own survey and was surprised to find, well, kind of similar to Zain as well, was surprised to find that there were more than 500 wakalas built between the 16th and 18th centuries in Cairo. You can see them here marked on the screen as these small dots on the maps of Cairo. To the left, they are marked in between the or within the Fatimid walls. To the right, they are the dots outside or beyond Cairo's Fatimid walls. The urban distribution of these wakalas shows that they were indeed meant or to compete with other constructions on Cairo's Qasaba. They were built in distinct clusters by certain patron groups and ethnicities that wanted to showcase or mark their control of certain neighborhoods in Cairo. By studying these building patterns, I was able, also like Zain, to identify 4 major types of wakalas built in Ottoman Cairo that are all associated, or each associated with distinct features and patron groups. The first type, it's not visible here because of the zoom, but anyways, the first type are wikalas that are freestanding. These were monumental constructions reaching large sizes up to 7,500 square meters. So this is just a little bigger than a typical soccer field. It's very huge. And they cost close to 1 million paras. These monumental constructions needed large expanses of land. And so they were mostly built in the neighborhood of Boulay during the 16th century, which was at the time rather empty. Now, beyond their freestanding form or freestanding plans, these wikalas share a number of features with the other three types that I will talk about, most notably the double segmented arch on their entrance portals, as well as the rawshan, or a type of wooden window on top of their portal. Because most of these wikalas of type A or freestanding were built by walis, they were known to have monumental foundation inscriptions. In front of us here is the foundation inscription of Wikalat Hassan Basha al-Wazir in Boulay, which also built during the 16th century. And it is quite unique because of its Persian inscriptions. It is possibly the earliest known Persian foundation inscription in Cairo. The second type are wikalas with axial entrances, or two axial entrances. These were naturally built in denser areas of the city, and they were known for their urban passages that facilitated commercial exchange and also provided street shortcuts for pedestrians. What is most interesting about this type is it really demonstrates the effect of wikalas on Cairo's social and movement in general, because many of these passages earned their own names beyond the wikalas, that were independent of the wikalas. In front of us here is a plan of Wikalat al-Jawharjiyya, built in the 18th century on the Qasaba. Its passage was known separately as Atfat al-Qisma al-Askariyya, in reference to the Mahkamat al-Qisma al-Askariyya, the Ottoman court that was in al-Zahiriyya madrasa across from the wikala. This really shows that wikalas had a major effect in movement within the city and interactions with other spaces in the city. The third and most common type of wikalas are those with a central elevated musalla. We're quite lucky that one of these was illustrated in detail by Pascal Coste, the 17th century Wikalat Dhul Fuqqar in Al-Jammaliyya. These types of wikalas, which I call type C, were built really in all neighborhoods. They are the most common. They were built in all neighborhoods across or throughout the entire Ottoman period. Their musallas are really a new, unique addition to the tradition of urban caravanserais, and they're quite unique in Cairo. I haven't seen it anywhere else. These musallas were described in the waqfiyas as places for libraries. So they were endowed with libraries for Al-Azhar scholars specifically, and they were also, according to the waqfiyas, they held monthly Sufi circles, or Sufi dhikr circles. So they served several functions beyond mere prayer. The importance of the musalla becomes even more prominent when we look at the documents and manuscripts that were housed within wikala musallas. Many of these documents show that the musallas and the wikalas themselves housed non-Sunni madrasas that were meant to complement the curriculums at Al-Azhar, and that these wikalas and musallas also served as important centers for manuscript production. Since the type C or wikalas with musallas were the most common, they also are currently or today the biggest source of what original decoration of Ottoman wukelas was like. It is apparent that tile work from all centers of the Ottoman Empire was used to decorate the facades and portals of these wukelas. It is also clear that extensive decorative carving, specifically geometric type, was used to decorate their portals as well, and its style is quite reminiscent of the decoration that we see in Anatolian caravanserais. The fourth and final type of wukelas that I included in my study are Ottoman wukelas that follow Mamluk plans. So these wukelas differ from the three previous types because of their smaller size, larger or more number of floors, and irregular division. Many of these type D or wukelas with Mamluk plans were actually built on top of previous Mamluk buildings. For instance, the 18th century wukelat Sharaibi we see here, which is located in Al-Azhar neighborhood, was built on top of one of the palaces of Al-Ghuri. Interestingly, type D wukelas feature blazons that are similar to Mamluk blazons. But unlike the Mamluk settings or Mamluk context where the blazon is actually or references the military rank of the patron, in Ottoman wukela context, it was actually, these blazons were used to warn thieves and attackers, signaling that the wukelas were protected by the Mamluk bodyguards of the merchants. And this really tells us that this changing dynamic between the Mamluk class and the merchants, and also how the merchants played a significant role in the politics that they actually had Mamluks to protect them. The varied functions that I've discussed and types of wukelas allowed them to transform the neighborhoods they occupied into desirable loci for urbanization. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the wukela became the typical form of modern architecture, as it was the largest it formed the largest percentage of new constructions in the city. This earned it a place in the 1867 exposition in Paris, alongside the Pharaonic temple and the Salamlik as the most important type of architecture in Egypt. The waqfiyas of wukelas do not only serve as a source on Cairo's Ottoman history, but they also provide information on pre-Ottoman monuments. The Mosque of Sultan Hassan, for example, shared one of its walls and part of its foundations with Wukelat al-Zaini, built in the 16th century, shown here. Unfortunately, the wukela does not survive, but its waqfiyya does, and it describes sections of the mosque, or what we now think of as the lost sections of the madrasa. And so in that respect, Ottoman wukelas and their waqfiyyas are quite useful for understanding pre-Ottoman history. This is also the case with the Mosque of Ibn Tulun, which shared its interior arcades and part of its ziyada with 3 wukelas. And I imagine their waqfiyyas might also contain information previously unknown on the history of the mosque. Beyond architecture, the trade inventories of wukelas serve as important sources on the fates of several manuscript libraries in Cairo. For instance, Salim Bazira, the last patron or the last owner of Wukalat al-Kikhya, which was built in the 18th century. So Salim Bazira, whose inventory is shown here, was the custodian, or he managed several libraries, to be specific, 4 libraries of wukelas in Al-Gamaliya, in addition to the library of the Khanqa of Papers al-Jashankir. He also was responsible for several early 20th century renovations in monuments in Al-Gamaliya. We know this from his trade inventory, which also includes some important notes or biographical notes about his life. I hope that my research has effectively demonstrated the value in examining commercial architectural typologies and possibly inspire future studies on the intersections between Wakala's, Cairo's manuscript history, and its social history as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yomna. And let's see, are there any questions for Yomna? We can have a few minutes for questions, if there are any. If not, then thank you, Yomna, and congratulations once more. It's been great having you and Zain in the department, and we look forward to you remaining, of course, part of the ARC family, and we hope both of you get to publish some of your research very soon. So as I mentioned earlier, part of the George Scanlon Award calls for a keynote lecture held every year with the ceremony. And we are extremely grateful that this year, Dr. Nicholas Warner, who is no doubt quite well known to all of you and needs no introduction, has accepted our invitation to deliver the Scanlon keynote lecture. As the short bio he shared with us highlighted, Nicholas Warner is an architect trained at Cambridge University, my alma mater, my other alma mater, and has been living in Egypt since 1993. At this date, he was privileged to study under Professor George Scanlon here at AUC. His primary research interest remains the Islamic architecture of Cairo, but he has also participated in and directed a variety of projects related to the documentation, preservation, and presentation of historic structures and archaeological material throughout Egypt. These include projects in Quseir, in Saqqara, the oases of Dakhla and Kharga, Luxor, Sohag, Aswan, and Cairo, where he worked for a number of years on the renovation of the Geir Anderson Museum. His books include The Monuments of Historic Cairo, a map and descriptive catalog published in 2005, and of course an indispensable source for anybody working on Cairo, The True Description of Cairo, a 16th century Venetian view in 2006. And since 2021, he has worked for the American Research Center in Egypt as Director of Cultural Heritage Projects, in which capacity he has conserved the shrine of Ikhwat Yusuf in Cairo from 2022 to 2025, and this is the subject of tonight's lecture, and another connection he has with Professor Scanlon. So without further ado, Nick, please.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction, Amina, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to celebrate the life and achievements of George Scanlon at the same time, who I was lucky enough to meet first in Oxford in 1992, and then worked with in Cairo in subsequent years as his student, and then obviously becoming his friend in his later years. So for me, it's a very great honor to be able to speak to you today about a project of mine that I never had the chance to show him, but obviously I think he would have been interested, as he was in most things. He was remarkable for his wide culture, which is something that I think is increasingly lacking in our age of increasing specialization. It seems that people with that breadth of culture are not so commonly found. So it is a great opportunity to remember him and to actually celebrate that aspect of his life. I think we're waiting for the presentation to catch up with us, or a bit further. Okay. Okay. Somebody can tell me at the back if they can hear. Can you hear? Yes? A little louder? Louder. Okay. It shall be louder. Okay, so here is a photograph of the irascible George in control at Fustat, the excavations that he directed in the 1960s with his Polish colleagues Kubiak and I think Antoine Ostrasz. So I'm glad to see that we have Polish colleagues in the audience, because George always had a very close connection with the Polish archaeological community in Egypt throughout the time that he was here, and so it's nice to be able to remember that as well. Fustat, of course, the archaeological site, also gave its name to Fustat, the boat which the American Research Center owned and used for many, many years throughout the 1960s and 70s, and I'm sure that it was George who christened it the Fustat. But it's here seen with, in dry dock in 1972 with the figure of Kent Weeks, another luminary of the American University in Cairo, standing in front of it, no doubt wondering what the bill for the restoration was going to be. Also, as Amina alluded to, George did serve as the director of the American Research Center in the late 50s and mid-60s, and was a contributor to the newsletter of the American Research Center at that time. And if anybody's interested, they are available through the American Research Center library portal. And I did dip into these. I'd never looked at these before, but I thought that they were worth having a little look at. Obviously, the letters were extremely entertaining. George wrote in a very interesting and amusing style. So here, the editors of the newsletter obviously were hoping that he was going to stop writing, but actually, no, he continued for some years after that. And here, I just highlighted this one from 1961 because of the way in which he was, even at that date, referring to the American state as a political ogre, and saying how difficult it was going to be for Americans to step out from underneath this shadow. The other thing that, of course, you know, we who work in Cairo today, we're always complaining about the fact that everything's being destroyed, and I'm the first person also to sort of complain about the fact that so much change has been happening at such high speed in Cairo over the recent years. But if you go back to 1962, well, George has the same comments from 1962 that necessity and progress are destroying monuments left, right, and center. And he alludes here to two projects. One is, of course, in the Sharia Muiz, where there was apparently a plan to widen the road in Sharia Muiz, which, of course, would have been a disaster in terms of what it did to some of the most important buildings in Cairo. And then also the fact that he was referring to the condition of monuments in the cemetery, what he called the minor works, as it were, the minor monuments. And it's actually about one of those minor monuments that I will be talking to you tonight. So it was quite interesting to find that he was making reference to that, as well as also to the fact that Fustat's archaeological treasures were going to be lost to low-cost housing, and indeed low-cost housing does occupy much of the site of Stabal Antar and the periphery of Fustat, which is today being rebuilt. I think that he would be very interested to see that the footprint of Fustat is now actually being recreated physically. So, of course, this idea of loss, which we all have, those of us who work with Islamic monuments and have done for some time, is one of the reasons why I, in the 90s, late 90s, started my work on the mapping of historic Cairo. And this is just a central section of the map around Sharia Muiz of Ben el-Kasrain. And it shows in red some of the buildings that were not registered, some of which have now already disappeared, and the need for absolutely proper documentation of sites. So I'm really, really happy to see that the awardees of the two awards that we saw tonight with their excellent presentations are actually engaged fully in documenting this heritage, because you never know when it's going to be there anymore. So I think it's of supreme importance that, that these sites are recorded to the best of our abilities. So now I'll come on to the subject of tonight's talk, which is a project that I've been working on for about 3 years now, which is one of the minor monuments that George referred to in the southern cemetery of Cairo. This is the shrine of Ikhwat Yusuf, the brothers of Yusuf, the prophet Yusuf, and it's located in a very striking place, which is at the foot of the Muqattam Hills, and you can see the Jewish mosque on the right there and the citadel in the background. The landscape obviously was not always looking like this, so of course I do encourage everybody to look quite deeply into the evolution of sites to understand the changes that have taken place at a site over time, and of course that involves going back through quite a lot of archives and also looking at things in quite a careful way. So the Muqattam edge of Cairo has always defined the eastern edge of Cairo, and here we see it in a manuscript map from one of the many manuscript maps illustrating the Kitab al-Bahrair by Piri Rais. This particular example is from the 16th century, but there are many other examples. And you'll see that on the top of the image, you'll see the Muqattam hills are referenced there with the word Zawiya, frequently placed over small little buildings with usually domes and minarets attached to them. So it's an indication that it was always a place for prayer and retreat. So this is more or less from the same angle, but taken in rather different media, which is one of the early views of Cairo from a balloon in 1904, taken by Edward Spelterini, looking again towards the eastern edge of the city in the Muqattam Hills. In the background there, no development you will see above the hills, as there was very little development even there when I came to Cairo first. So the landscape evolved, but some of the most prominent buildings are dating from the Fatimid period. Not just the Mashhad or the Zawiya of Badr al-Gamali on the top of the hill, but also this little cluster of Fatimid buildings at the base of the hill. So clearly there was something going on with with a sacred landscape. And it was sacred not only to Muslims, but also to the Copts. So there's this very famous miracle of the Muqattam, which you see depicted here in a painting from a church in the Muqattam. And this was a confrontation between the patriarch Abraham of Alexandria and Al-Hakim. It was essentially a test of faith. And the patriarch managed to get the mountain to rise, much to the astonishment of Al-Hakim, who's here on his horse. He's also, Al-Hakim, connected with the Muqattam in other ways, of course, because that's where he died. Legend has it that he disappeared on the Muqattam hills, riding a donkey at night. So that's something we should also not forget. And he was responsible for the restoration of one of the buildings at the bottom of the Muqattam hills. Sorry, let me go back. So Joseph. Joseph obviously is quite a significant figure across all the monotheistic religions, but his brothers are less obvious as being candidates for commemoration, because one of the things that his evil brothers did to him was to sell him into slavery, to send him to Egypt, and that's how he arrived here, and it seems odd that they should be being commemorated rather than himself. So this is a slide just really for any Egyptologist who might have strayed into this room by mistake. I thought that I would give you something to look at, and it shows a 19th century painting by Al-Mutazema showing Joseph, who achieved the sort of the heights of being not only the overseer of the granaries of the pharaoh, but also the overseer of his dreams, or the interpreter of his dreams. So Joseph has, of course, a well-known surah in the Quran, Surah 12, dedicated to him, which seems to be a celebration, when you read it, of the quality of mercy, which is something that he evidently displayed towards his brothers in his later life. As to why the shrine should be associated, or the building should be associated with the brothers, there is this account, which we have, which explains that it was a mashhad ruya, a dream place, a remembrance place that was caused by somebody having a dream which led them to construct a tomb in that location for the brothers Joseph. I mean, this is This is not fact, obviously. I mean, in fact, when we worked on the building inside the domed tomb chamber, there was no evidence at all for any burial whatsoever. There were crypts outside, but there was nothing inside the domed chamber. So that in itself is of some interest. Later on, the site was used for other monuments, right through to the end of the 18th century, and they're all distinctive buildings in themselves, very interesting buildings with their own complex histories. And the site itself has quite a complex development, because you can see here it changed, because this minaret, for example, was destroyed. The domed building that you see there in the middle was replaced. The mosque of the tomb of Omar ibn al-Fard, the well-known Sufi poet, still survives, and the mosque of Shahin al-Khalawati, the leader of the Khalawati dervishes at the background, is still there. And right at the top, where I've indicated the circle, or the white circle at the top, is a remarkable series of rock-cut chambers used for prayer, obviously, because of the presence of the mihrabs, but also for contemplation, I think, and for retreat, this idea of khilwa. And these still survive all the way through the Muqattam. This is one particular spot, but there are many, many difficult places to get to along the edge of the hills, which have this kind of architecture. And as to dating it, I don't know. Is it Fatimid? Could be. We can talk about that. The site itself was also heavily used in the 19th century, probably before, as a site for the extraction of lime. The hills themselves are made of limestone. They were quarried and continue to be quarried, but also used for the production of lime, which is taken out of the hill, broken up, and then burnt. And the British were very good at this. They built these railways here to take the lime from that area and distribute it around Cairo to different building sites. And this is an amazing photograph from 1920s, which I found in the Swiss Institute, which shows these enormous lime kilns. You know, we tend to forget about the production of raw materials for the construction of buildings, you know, but these interesting example in that you can see people actually quarrying the little stones, the bigger stones, breaking them up, carrying them into the kilns, which are then set on fire to produce the reaction that will produce the calcium carbonate that we use as lime today. Tourism, yes, even in this remote spot, the tourists, the more adventurous tourists managed to venture in the 1920s. This is one of Leonard Landrock's archival images. How they got up there, I don't know, but you know, especially the lady, it was quite challenging climb. And the tourists, what did they come to see apart from the brave ones who made it to the top? They came to have a look at the Bektashi order of Sufis, their own takeya, which was at the bottom of the hills, which is a well-known spot to come and look at the sunset as it went over the pyramids. Difficult to imagine nowadays, very difficult to see even the pyramids from there today because of the haze, but it was a favorite destination to go there and look at the sunset, and also to admire the apparently still functioning in 1920s Bektashi kitchen, which was another popular site at the time. So now we're going to go, I think this is the point where there's a video. So because the project was fortunate enough to be able to do very high level of 3D scanning of both before and after conditions, it was possible to produce a video which actually gives you the highlights of, shows you the location first of all, but it shows you the highlights of the before and after. But I'll explain, you know, the process a little bit more later, but this just gives you an indication of the changes that took place in the site. So here you can see from before the time we started working on the project to after the conclusion of the conservation work from a number of different angles. One of the biggest challenges, of course, was to remove the rubble, which I wish it could happen like that, but it didn't. Rebuilding large chunks of the north wall of the building. And this is a project that took place over I think it was 4 seasons, 6 weeks each. All the brickwork, the bricks for the conservation work were all made in Minya to the same dimensions as the Fatimid brickwork. Very, very small bricks. They were like, you know, really quite small. For those of us who have to also work with pharaonic material, you know, where the bricks are serious bricks, the Fatimid bricks are very delicate. It's like little bits of biscuits almost. This is just, I'm sorry, the proportions are a little bit squeezed by the projector, but I think it gives you an idea of the overall effect of the conservation, at least. And this, of course, is why the shrine is famous, or relatively famous, and amongst a limited circle. It is for the surviving rare example of a triple mihrab with stucco ornamentation. So much for the video. I think we also have to ask ourselves the question about why we are conserving things, you know, because in some cases it's not really very obvious immediately as to why we're conserving things. I think if you have a choice in a situation like this, what to do you allow it to continue to be submerged by rubbish and rubble, or even to actually backfill it, which is another option, to actually fill the thing up with sand so that it preserves it just by sitting there? Or do you actually conserve it? And I think you have to have good reasons for conserving it. In this case, the reason for this project was essentially to conserve the mihrab itself, which is of such outstanding art historical value that it would be sad to let it go and not be visible. So there are many other reasons, of course, for working on conservation projects. A building might be of great value to a particular community. You know, it may have other attributes that are historical value of some sort, an artistic value, as in this case. So one of the opportunities that are presented by projects like this are also to carry out some training endeavors. So here we trained a number of people from the Ministry of Antiquities and Tourism in digital recording technology for creating photogrammetric models of ruins, which was carried out by the American Research Center in its offices in Cairo, just after COVID finished, in fact. And we took the opportunity also to be able to create a very, very, very high level record of the mihrab itself, which was done by a company called Factum Arte, who are based in Madrid. And the reason for doing this is, of course, you get an immense amount of information from the detailed modeling that's possible through high-level recording, digital recording. And I had always had it in my mind that we would use this as a vehicle for creating a digitally restored facsimile. And the reason I wanted to do a digitally restored facsimile was to try and show that it was not necessary in many cases to physically restore on the actual object. You could actually restore it digitally and preserve the object in its as-found condition, which I think is an important thing in Egypt, because there is a very great tendency here to restore, not only in Islamic sites, but also in Coptic and pharaonic sites, to recreate what we think was there. It's not always the same thing as what was there. So hence the need, I think, to demonstrate that this technology actually can be used to do this without damaging the original monument or the original object. Sadly, there was no take-up from the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. I offered this to the Museum of Civilization, but the first question they had for me is like, no, we don't want that. Can we have Tutankhamun's tomb, please? So that didn't go anywhere. Okay, so a lot of recording to produce the information that you saw in the videos. This is the condition that it was in before we started. As I said, getting access to remove the vast amounts of rubble that had accumulated on the site was very difficult. or I thought it was going to be very difficult, but then my contractor, brilliant man that he is, rented temporarily a neighboring hush, a neighboring funerary enclosure, which was not yet occupied. Nobody been buried in it, but it was next door. So we could actually borrow that for the term of the project and use it as a way of getting out all of the rubble and bringing in all of our materials, of which we had quite a lot of materials, particularly stone, to bring in to the project. So the north wall had to be more or less totally rebuilt. There were major areas of loss. We knew from Cresswell that there was a wooden roof over part of this area, but it was not described in any detail. So you'll see what I did with it, which was to interpret it as a malkaf, primarily to get light into the center of the building. So that's the area in question at the back. And there was a missing groin vault also that we had to repair. There's the groin vault. Interesting, the vaulting in this building is all Mamluk period, and one of the things that we were able to do through our work was to differentiate between the phasing of the first earlier phase Fatimid work, second phase Fatimid work, and then Mamluk interventions, which expanded the covered area of the shrine. And that's the vault after it was rebuilt following the original alignments. The window is a complete invention on my side. It's differentiated from the rest of the brickwork by having no mortar joints, so it's quite clearly a new thing. But we needed light and ventilation, and I think that there would have been some in that location. We rebuilt an adjacent arcade, which is an Ottoman period arcade, really just to give it some stability. And that's the finished product seen from the side, from the north west side, with the funerary enclosure that adjoined it, that was added to it in the Ottoman period, not yet totally visible, but you'll see that we came to restore that as well. This shows some of the brickwork being done on the inside. Of course, we use lime mortars for all of our work. There had been relatively few previous interventions in this site, so the Comité had not really done very much apart from put a number on it, number 1301. But there had been some emergency work done in the 1980s to stop the collapse of the dome. That was done in cement. So this shows the reconstruction of one of the arches. Interestingly, the floor inside the main domed room, the original floor was a plaster floor to which had been added 2 stone floors in subsequent periods. We actually kept part of the last floor and used that as the basis for our modern paving that added to it, as it were. So, but the original floor was a plaster one. And outside the tomb, there are a number of crypts. There are 3 crypts with undoubtedly Fatimid period, same type of brick, same kind of arches, well finished with plaster. We did not investigate these. We did not get involved in any anthropological work of any sort. So we restored them and left them. But they had been interfered with by dogs and other things, so I think the chances of finding any intact burials would have been fairly slim. A lot of the cleaning, basic cleaning, was carried out with ammonium carbonate poultices, which is a very non-aggressive way of cleaning and takes quite a long time, obviously. During the process, we also found out that the mihrab had been used at one point as the goalposts to play football, because we had the impressions of the footballs on the plaster in the mihrab, which was quite something. And these just show you some of the before and afters of the main space leading to the dome chamber. After all the losses had been filled, joints had been repointed, and plaster preserved, as you'll see more of in a moment. Interestingly, there was a cistern here, a water tank, which would have been filled up, I think, by hand, by water carriers coming from the Nile. We also have an adjacent monument, Ottoman monument from the 18th century, the tomb of Suleiman Aga al-Hanafi tomb and Sabil of Suleiman Aga al-Hanafi, which has an enormous system we have discovered through the documentation work, I would say 6 meter by 6 meter by 6 meters, so that's a very large underground water tank, which would have obviously served a community living in this area. You know, who they were, it remains to be seen, but there was water brought to this site. So the final part of the project involved the what's often referred to in Egypt as fine conservation. So fine conservation in this case was the conservation of the plaster and the stucco of the plaster stucco of the mihrab. So for this, we imported, especially for the job, a laser cleaning unit from Germany. Laser cleaning with light is something that has been done in pharaonic tombs in West Bank in Luxor, but this is, to my knowledge, the first time it's ever been used in an Islamic monument. So that is the half and half, which shows you what it does. It allows you to control very precisely the degree to which you clean. This is a very friable surface, a very soft surface, so it was a really good demonstration of the capacity of this technique, and that's obviously after it was finished. It still takes a long time. All of this takes a long time. This is just showing you fixing the cracks, basically, in the mortar layers, in the plaster layers. We have 4 layers of plaster in this building, which have got inscriptions from different periods, ranging greatly in style and competency, from fancy floriated Kufic in blue that you can see up at the top, to scratched in graffiti done by pilgrims, and other ones that are clearly done by tutored hands, you know, so there is a clear case to be made, I think, for scribes, as it were, sitting in the shrine, which was used as a stop on one of the pilgrimage circuits through the southern cemetery. So we have ziyarah manuals going back to, you know, the Mamluk period, at least, which describe the visitation of all of these sites in the southern cemetery, which was a huge pilgrimage site, more than the northern cemetery. Malesh Hani, I'm sorry. So we're now entering a phase of the project where we have to record all of this information, and we're talking about hundreds of inscriptions, but particularly interesting, I think, to find out who's leaving them, you know, and why, and also the formulas that are being used in the inscriptions are quite interesting because they are cultural crossovers. So, you know, you get the same inscriptions in churches as you would get here, and sometimes you have Sufis leaving inscriptions in churches, and you have Christians leaving inscriptions in these places. So it's quite an encouraging sort of evidence for the heterodox nature of religion in Egypt, I think. Oh yes, and in this project we are assisted by the German Archaeological Institute and Sarah Massoud, who is an inspector at Aswan, who works in Deir al-Bahadra in Aswan, St. Simeon's Monastery, where they have a very similar corpus of inscriptional material. So it's good to have people who are trained in looking at this stuff, because I certainly can't read it. On the roof, when we were working to replace the roof with a new roof, we did find quite a lot of pots. And these were Mamluk period pots, which unglazed, many of them wasters, slightly damaged pots, that they used to lighten the loads, the structural loads, in the corners of the domes. So it's common practice, going back, way back in Egypt, to actually put loose, light material in the corners so that you don't load them excessively. And so these were taken out and actually became part of a new display that we put into the front room of the shrine, which also includes some of the glazed wares that we encountered during this work, which include not only George's favorite soi-disant Fayumi ware, which is something that he would always say, this is soi-disant Fayumi ware. So we have some of that, but we also have some fake celadons, as well as, of course, lots and lots of Ottoman pipes. Sadly, no Fatimid lusterware. I was just hoping for one piece of Fatimid lusterware. No, nothing. So we concluded the project last year in about October. We did a few things that were requested of us by the ministry, such as putting a pair of doors onto the entrance to the shrine, to the domed room. And we rebuilt the wall of the enclosure wall of the funerary hush immediately to the north, Ottoman period wall. And during that process also had to do a little bit more archaeological work. So we did some excavations here. And this is when I really thought of George, was because we discovered a champagne cork from Paul Roger. And we also discovered that there is a chronology, a typology and a chronology for champagne corks. So we're working on exact dating of this, this important piece, but everybody who knew George will be aware of his singing the song Blue Champagne. So this is for George. And so that's the area that we rebuilt, the foundations that we found. And it's actually a small, now destroyed domed tomb with an associated building, as you can see from a 19th century photograph. So that's really the project, which came to an end except for the documentation part of the inscriptions, which is going on now and will probably take quite a long time to continue with that work. It's a project which is obviously the product of many hands. These are the people who have participated in the project over the 3 years that we've been doing it. So I do have the good fortune to work with the same team of craftsmen for the last 25 years, and it's been my privilege to be able to work with them for that length of time. They often know what I want before I know what I want, which is quite interesting sometimes. So I'm very, very lucky to have this incredible team to support the work. And it wouldn't obviously be right not to end with George's favorite expression, was keeping the faith. So we keep the faith, but also we are useless in the face of what is being ignored or gainsaid. So I think we have to accept that there are limits to what we can do, but I do encourage everybody to do what they can. So keep the faith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, very much. This has been amazing, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions. And thank you for evoking George, who, Professor Scanlon is always on our minds. So I'm sure there are quite a few questions for you. We have a couple of other mics that we can also pass around.
Thank you, Nicholas. That was fascinating. I hadn't noticed that wonderful blue Kufic inscription on the wall before, which is partially obscured by a later graffito. Is there any plans after you read the later graffito to remove it to expose the whole of the Fatimid piece?
Sadly, there is no more of that Fatimid piece, because what you see in the picture as being a later graffito is indeed on. It is a later graffito, but it's on an earlier layer of plaster. So that means that the original plaster at the bottom of the perhaps Fatimid blue Kufic inscription is no longer there. So I'm very sorry. It's our most beautiful inscription.
Thank you for that very informative talk. I just had a question about some of the pieces that you found. There seemed to be pipes or a comb. I just wanted to ask, what context were they found in the site?
I think that the site, after it had been fallen out of use as being a sort of pilgrimage site and people going there on a regular basis, was used in a domestic way. So there was a house that was built on top of the building, for example, which you see in some of the early photographs. And the horsh outside was obviously used for domestic purposes as well. So, I mean, in that way, nothing much changes in the cemetery, because the cemetery is obviously a place where people live as well as bury their dead. Burials still take place in this cemetery. It's still, you know, I've been there when people have been interred. But I think that in the 19th century, early 20th century, certainly there were people living there, in 18th century certainly. So a lot of the Ottoman pipes, which I'm no expert in dating Ottoman pipes, but we have certainly got 18th century Ottoman pipes, and all the other bits to do with domestic stuff. We don't have a lot of fine wares, you know, but I mean the fact that we found all the Mamluk ceramics on top of the roof is not surprising, because they were using Mamluk pots to fill in the corners of the roof, and we know that that was all the stone architecture was Mamluk, so it wasn't a great surprise that, but yes, it was used for domestic purposes.
Thank you.
This was very insightful. Thank you so much. I was wondering, I think that whenever there was a plague or an epidemic that struck the city of Cairo, many people would head to these remote places thinking that it's a safe place to stay. Is this the case with this place or this shrine? Has there been any evidence that it was used at a time of plague or crisis?
I don't have any personal evidence. I think you would have to go through the texts and see if there was any specific mention made of retreat to the cemetery as a result of the plague. I guess Makrizi is a starting point with his description of the plague years in Egypt. But I don't know personally that that was the case. Obviously, special events did take place on the Muqattam, particularly the prayers for the deliverance of rain. In the absence of rain, there would definitely be a ritual on the top of the Muqattam that would take place for rain to come. And it may have been that this area was also associated with other aspects of dealing with huge problems like famines and other things. I think it's an interesting avenue to pursue. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and the other thing, you showed the picture with those pottery jars that are placed at the corners. So what is the main function of these jars?
The main function is to lighten the load in the corners of the vaults, so that to stop the vaults, to decrease the weight on the corners of the vault, you would put in empty vessels like that. And very often they use pigeon pots and things like that for this purpose. And it's something that goes through all Egyptian architecture. You find it in Christian contexts and probably in Pharaonic contexts as well.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello, thank you very much for this. And I have one question regarding the mihrabs. So, was they colored or not, the three mihrabs, and how we can make sure that the laser cleaning does not remove any color or something like that? Thank you.
Well, the answer to the question is that, much to our disappointment, again, a bit like the inscription that Bernard was talking about, there's no evidence for any polychromy at all on the mihrab, which is a surprise, because we were expecting it to be a bit of red, a bit of blue, who knows, maybe a little bit of gold, but there was absolutely no trace of any surviving polychrome decoration on the carved surfaces themselves. Second, as to the question of whether you would remove something inadvertently through the laser cleaning process, obviously cleaning processes, you know, are things that have to be controlled very carefully by the conservators who are in charge of the project, in charge of the actual cleaning. So whatever it is, whatever method is being used, whether it's a chemical cleaning process or if it's cleaning by light, in this case, one of the reasons for using a laser was that there was no wet process involved. It's all dry work, which is important, I think, in this case. And obviously the conservators who are doing the work are experienced in using such equipment, and they carry out a series of tests at the beginning of the process to determine the exact range at which you set the machine for cleaning, because it's possible to clean with a point, very small point. It's possible to clean with a band of light. So these are things that also change depending on the particular circumstances that you encounter, the conditions that you encounter within the area to be cleaned. So it's a careful process. I'm sure that we did not remove anything.
Okay.
Hi, Nicholas. Can you tell me if the Shrine of Ikhwat Yusuf is part of any ongoing site presentation that's desired by the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities? And if so, what part would this play?
That, of course, is a very important question, because the future of these buildings does, not just Ikhwat Yusuf, but many of the other monuments that we work with, does depend very much on their potential for reuse. So in this context, I would say that the discussions that we are having with the ministry are at a very early stage. We're being encouraged to pursue site management in the form of an adjacent conservation project for an Ottoman period building that is next door to this one, but we are still at a very early stage of discussing how, for example, people can access this building, because I've suggested that maybe the Antiquities Department would offer a telephone number, for example, that you might call if you wanted to go there, because at the moment only 2 people have the key, so I'm one of them still. I haven't given my copy back yet. Then, of course, if people are going to visit it as they should, there should be a cleaning regime initiated, and maybe the Ministry of Endowments, the ARCE, who actually run the building next door, could be persuaded to actually clean it on a weekly basis. Otherwise, we're back to a situation that our American Research Center was in with the Zawiya Fargan Barkuk, opposite Babzuela, which is where the American Research Center for years and years and years and years and years paid for the upkeep of that building and the accessibility to that building. And that stopped when we handed it back to the ministry, and it became the focus of another project. So nobody's been able to go in there for a couple of years, I think, at least now. So it's really about who's going to pay for what, in fact, and how you arrange in this case, because it's quite a difficult place to get to. It's not an easy place to get to. How you arrange for it to be open by appointment. I mean, I think that it will have to be by appointment. And I hope that in the next phase of discussions scheduled for next week with our ministry colleagues, we'll be able to come to some closer understanding of how that might work, because it's one thing to do something like this, but then, of course, to share it, other than sharing it on this platform, is a more difficult question to answer.
Dr.
Thank you. And also thank you to the students. These 3 presentations were really outstanding and brilliant. Caused a lot of self-doubt in terms of questioning whether I made the right decision to do textual studies and not something much more stimulating. I had a question. Did I catch you right? You said that there's cross-confessional inscriptions or graffiti on this site?
Not on this site, no. We have, I mean, maybe there will be, who knows, but we certainly have the case of, in Aswan, at Der Bahadra, St. Simeon's monastery, so-called, there are examples of Sufis leaving inscriptions in the medieval church there, but we haven't found anything here yet.
And the inscriptions that we have here, I mean, that's going to be documented now in the process? It's not...
Yes, definitely. The project, in my view, the project cannot be completed until all the inscriptions are fully documented and there's a complete catalogue and all of the trimmings that go with that, and a critical reading of what they are and what they mean in a wider social context.
I had a question. I'm wondering, you said you're in conversations with the ministry and so on, and of course these are ongoing conversations with all the different stakeholders, yes, as we're taught to call them. how do you make an argument for the minor buildings and minor monuments, and especially one that's not so easy to access, not so famous, not so brilliant, there's no sultan, it's not so easy to consider this a potential wedding venue. How do you make the case for the minor building?
Well, in this case, if I may say it, it's slightly more sinister than that, because there is a plan already. And the plan involves a new path of religious tourism along the edge of the Muqattam that includes not only this building, but a number of other sites there. And why I say sinister is that the early iterations of this plan show that the idea is to remove, it's an old idea, is to remove all of the tombs, all of the buildings, except for the registered monuments, and leave them in a kind of wasteland without any context. And so there is a plan. So I proceed with great caution, because I don't really want that plan to come to fruition, because I feel that there are too many sites, even, I mean, it was happening in the time of the Comité, but it's more extreme now, the idea that you're going to protect the building by isolating it from its context and depriving it in that way of much of its meaning, you could say. So I'm nervous about plans.
I guess we don't have any more questions, so it's time to thank you again, Nick. Thank you very much, Dr. Nicholas Warner, for this fascinating lecture. Thank you to Zain and Yomna for your very interesting research. Congratulations on winning both awards. You make us proud. Good luck to our other graduate students finishing up their theses in the coming weeks. Thank you all for joining us, friends, faculty, students, families of the Department of Arab and Islamic Civilizations. Thank you for joining us, and please do join us for a reception outside in the foyer. Thank you.